Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer, Mark Sable. Thank you so much for being here, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me, Sophia. I'm excited about this.
So let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Wow, yeah, Mark Sable. Where do I start? I'm originally from New York. I live in Los Angeles now. And for almost the past 20 years, it'll be 20 years this summer, I've been writing comic books, and graphic novels. For probably half that time, I've also been teaching, writing. I teach, at a place called the School of Visual Arts in New York. I do it online where I teach script writing of all kinds. So that's comic book writing, but it's also writing for film and television, which I've done, and like animation and things like that. And I also teach writing for role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, which is also another kind of writing that I've been doing. And then the last thing that I do is I work as what's called a futurist, where basically I consult with the the US government, but also like in military, but not just American military, like the Australian military I've consulted with before, but also like the scientific community, the intelligence community, sometimes business, about just sort of creative ways for them to envision the future. Because I write a lot of things that take place in the future, whether it's science fiction or speculative fiction. I also tend to write a lot of war and espionage stuff, so that kind of plays into it. And then for fun, I like to draw. I'm not a professional artist, but I've been getting more serious about drawing. I think when we met at
And I saw a
Emerald City.
storyboard.
Yeah, you saw me like storyboarding out. So this will be the first place I announce it, I guess. And I'm gonna this year my aim is to draw my I've always had other artists, much more talented artists than me, draw my comics, but this year I'm trying to draw my own, and just probably self-publish a small version of it. And then I do a little bit of stand-up comedy too. I'm in my very early stages of that. But yeah, so that's probably more than a little bit about me. That's probably a lot about me. But
No, I read that on the forum, but like it sounds so cool, even though you just said it, even just hearing it right now. What do you mean by like the futurist?
so yeah, because I write, because I've written a lot of stories that take place in like the near future, and a lot of them have had to do either with war or with spying or things like that. Um, so I somehow came to the attention of, uh, you know, people in the government and people in the scientific community, and they've been like, it's been interesting. Like it's been so actually, let me jump back for a second. So there's a book that I wrote
Mhm.
way back in like 2009, I think, called Unthinkable. And it
Mhm.
was based on a real thing, which is that after 9/11, the US government hired people, went and or recruited writers, directors, and other creative people because they felt like people kept saying like 9/11 was like a failure of imagination, on the part of like the government, in terms of like, oh, we could never have predicted that. Yeah, people had hijacked planes before, but the idea that they would hijack planes and then use them as like, use them to hit buildings was not something that anybody had ever thought of. And
Yeah.
people would also be saying things like, oh, well, like, wow, this is like something out of a Jerry Bruckheimer movie or a Tom Clancy novel. And so
Mhm.
what the government did was they went and hired, um, some well-known writers and directors and creative people. And the idea was, let's hire them to come up with worst case terror scenarios so that we can think of them hopefully before the terrorists do. And then in this way, we can like think of ways to stop them before, so that we're prepared for the next 9/11 or whatever it looks like. So I read about that, 15 years ago, and I said, "Oh, I think there's a good idea for a story here." And so I wrote this book called Unthinkable. It's from Boom Studios. It
Mhm.
was a comic book, and the idea was basically, well, what if a writer who got recruited for this program what if they like all the terror scenarios he started coming up with, the fictional ones, started to come true? And then it becomes this thriller where he's a writer like me,
Mm.
and like now he doesn't know there's some conspiracy theory, and it's like he has to try to stop them, but he's like not an action hero. So I wrote this, and I mean, a funny, really quick story I'll tell you is I wrote it, and then when the first issue came out, I was actually flying from LA to New York, and I got stopped by security by the TSA that we have here
Mm.
in the States. And they saw the cover of the book, and it had like, a jihadist with like an AK-47 on the cover. And then they started reading, and it's just like every other word is like 9/11 and terror. And so they like detained me. And and I had to explain to them like this is just a comic book, like this isn't a real plan to,
Yeah.
but so anyway, a few years after I wrote that, and I wrote a couple other books that were in the kind of the same vein, um, I got contacted by a place called the Atlantic Council, which is this nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
that made up of like sort of people from different democratic countries, and and they have something called like it was called the art of future warfare, and then it just became the art of the future, where they were sort of doing a similar thing where they were like asking people who were creative to come and talk to them, and to people in the government, to people in the military about like not just like what we think the future is going to be like,
Mm.
because I don't pretend to predict like, okay, like I know exactly what's going to happen. I think that anybody who says they do, is probably lying. Um, but but to help them think creatively about the future. And so I've gotten to meet with like I've worked with like the United States Marines. Like I helped them put a graphic novel together that was all just written and drawn by Marines. And
Marines
and
can draw.
yeah. So not all of them can, but it's interesting in the Marines, they actually have something called, it's really unique. It's called like a combat artist. And I might not be using the exact correct term, but it's somebody
Mm.
that goes out with them and like draws, like not necessarily like while bullets are flying. Like obviously then they're
Yeah.
going to put their thing down, but like while they're either training or they may be out in the field in, whatever country Marines are deployed into. And it's part of a tradition. Like if you go back and you look in World War II, like there were artists in addition to photographers that went out and like would send drawings back home, and they would become like cartoons, like, like political, almost like political cartoons, but like, and so it's this long tradition of that. So I work with some of the people who did that, and then there are other just some that just happen to have that talent. I think they might have had to bring in some other artists, but the idea was it was their stories and like what they thought, what would the Marine Corps be like in 2035, 2045, 2055, and they it was a collection of these short stories, and really it was their ideas, and I was just helping them to sort of, you know, flesh them out and tell stories with them.
Mm.
Um, and the idea was then they could present that to the commandant, the head of the Marine Corps, and also to people in like Congress and the government. And the idea is like, storytelling is just a really good way to convey an idea. So, I mean, mostly the stories I'm telling are to entertain people, but
Yeah.
they can also be to educate people. And it's much more appealing, I think, for somebody who works in the government to, instead of reading yet another like 100-page paper, to read like a comic that's got a story in it that might have the same information, but
Mm.
it's like, oh, here's this beautiful art to look at. Here's a story where like, instead of it's just saying like, well, in the future, we think there's going to be a pandemic. I remember this was one of the stories that they came up with. There's going to be a pandemic in the Philippines, and the United States and China are going to be competing to see who can help because, yes, they want to help, but they also want to have influence in the country. And so it's one thing to like tell you that, but like it's another thing to have a story told from the point of view of one of the Marines who's trying to help during this and this was written before the act for the COVID pandemic. So it actually turned out to be kind of weirdly
Real.
prescient, you know. But so it's stuff like, yeah, so it's things like that. I mean, I've gotten to meet like the best part of it is like I've gotten to meet really interesting, like I love going to comic conventions and meeting people. That's how I met you. But like,
Yeah.
I meet other people in comics, or I live in LA, and most people I meet here are somehow in the entertainment industry, right?
Mm.
But like by being a futurist, like I've got to meet like Navy SEALs, I've gotten to meet astronauts, I've gotten to meet like scientists who work on like robots, like I got to go, I flew to this place in Florida and like I saw these robots that can basically like walk like humans. Like you've probably seen videos of them, right? And can
Yeah.
like jump upstairs and like that was just what they could do like 5 years ago. I can't even imagine what they can do now, let alone what they'll do 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And so it's really interesting. And it's like, I like meeting with those people. I like feeling like I'm helping in some way. But also I feel like, selfishly, like it also gives me all kinds of ideas, like just being around these people and learning from them and
Mm.
hearing their stories. And it's stuff that I've been able to put back into into my own work. So it's been really fun.
Oh my God, your works are literally affecting the government. That's so crazy.
Yeah, we'll see if like, I certainly like there are people that are hearing ideas of mine, like whether anything, to my knowledge, nothing has ever been like, it's not like, okay, they're suddenly adopting any of my policies, which so the good part about that is if there's anything bad happening at the government, you can't blame it on me, but I can't take credit either. I can't take credit either. But it made me feel good because it wasn't just me, it was they got a really diverse group of people and writers from like some may be well known, but some not others, but like writers of all different races, genders, sexuality, different backgrounds that I think, we're helping to bring a lot of different perspectives that like, if you spent your whole life, like let's say in the military, you
Mm.
might not come into contact with these people. And so I think I like the idea that at least these ideas are getting into the system. It's, the government, American government especially is really big. It's very hard to make changes.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But it also gave me faith because the people that I did work with were really, we may have had our politics may have been different, but everybody was really smart. Everybody was really open to listening, and you know, it did give me some faith. I think that like, okay, whoever is president or whoever the elected people are, there are still a lot of people in government who really do care about making the world better and
Mm.
are willing to listen to other ideas. And I think, especially like if you just go on Twitter or like watch the news, it seems like nobody's willing to listen to one another. And so it gave me a little bit of faith that like, yeah, there are still people that like care about other different ideas and are willing to listen to it and willing to like have an open mind. I think
Mm.
that's something that's really important.
I thought when you first said you're like a futurist for the military, I thought you like predict creative ways that other people would attack us. Like, what if they like landed into like a new amusement park instead of like a tower, you know?
I've done some of that kind of stuff, like, not where like I'm sitting down with a general and they're taking down all my ideas, but like, they've done things where like I've written short stories and then like I'm always trying to come up with just because I'm always trying to come up with something original, like my stories will have things in them like that. And so hopefully they're reading it and they'll be like, oh yeah, maybe we hadn't thought of that. And
Mm.
that kind of thing. And but it's also not just thinking about like, are we going to be attacked, but like thinking about the places where these attacks are coming from and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what can we do besides invading those countries to like help those countries become places that are not um a place where terrorists are going to thrive. So like one of the things, and it was something I learned from some of the people that I work with, was just like
Mm.
there's like how well a country does, like how well economically it is, how happy the people are, has so much to do with how well women are educated, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems like I mean, it seems like such an obvious thing, and maybe to a lot of people it really is, but you'd be surprised because it's just like, okay, if you don't have women working, that means half the economy is not work, that half the population is not working. That means everybody else has to work, twice as hard. You're probably going to have, poverty, the income gap's going to be more. Then in those same countries, a lot of times women's health isn't taken care of. So like the life expectancy isn't long. And you look at a place like Afghanistan where, you know, the Taliban was and where Al Qaeda was, like women, were and unfortunately are still really excluded from places like that. And, it's look, it's not just necessarily Muslim countries, and that's not the only way, but it's also like, you know, the environment is a big thing too. Like countries that are suffering from environmental catastrophes, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people there, right?
And like
Um,
low birth rates too.
yeah, you're going to have exactly like low birth rates. You're going to have health problems. You're going to have like, okay, it could be whether it's there's not enough water because it's the climate is dry, which is like part of what happened in Syria and part of what was responsible for like the civil war there was like ecological problems. And you have places like India and Pakistan where which are doing India is doing very well in many ways, but or Bangladesh where there's terrible flooding all the time and
Mm.
climate change is making that worse. And what I found it was interesting is like you don't think of like climate change or women's rights as being like things the military cares about. You think, oh,
Yeah.
there's some really like liberal or progressive ideas and military is so conservative. But the truth is like they need to think of those things because you can't just be like, well, we're only going to wait until somebody attacks, like, or we're going to wait until we hear about something. And then, I mean, yes, the idea of the military is sort of to like, is to defend, right? But it's like the best thing to do is to be proactive. And it's like, well, if you could give just like a little bit of money to a country to like, help them predict, like, one thing is like to help protect against pandemics, right? Like, a country where, like that's where a lot of, aid goes to is like, if you can stop a pandemic really early on, you can
Mm.
prevent it from spreading. Like,
Yeah.
as terrible as Ebola has been in Africa, like we've been very lucky that it hasn't spread in like large numbers to America, to Canada, to Europe.
Mm.
But like a lot of that's because Western countries have invested money into caring for people, sending doctors there, sending epidemiologists, all this stuff there. So that kind of stuff, it can be like a small investment, but like, I mean, it may seem like a big investment because it'll be millions of dollars or even hundreds of millions of dollars, but compared to how much we spend on other things, it's actually not that much. And it also like makes whatever country is doing it, it makes them look good, whether, people will have a higher opinion of it. So it's like people are less likely to attack a country that, has given them help. But it's also
Mm.
just like, the world is very connected and it gets more connected in every day, especially with the internet, but not just with that, because people travel and people who are sick travel and like, it's so if you can find so it's good that it makes me happy that they are thinking that like the military and intelligence agencies and businesses and other places are thinking about this. But
Mm.
I think, we all need to think about it more. And because the world is very connected, it's easy to just sort of retreat. And I know, we're in a time when countries are becoming very, including the country I'm in, is becoming very, it's very divisive and people are becoming feeling like, let's get isolated. And it's just like, we can't go back to a world where, you know, everybody traveled by horse or by like boats that took, like months to get someplace. Like it just, we can't go backwards. So we have to figure out a way to like get along, work together on things. And it doesn't mean that different countries don't have their own interests and don't have their own problems that they need to solve. But it does mean like certain problems can only be solved, by working together.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of? I think Japan was like isolated for a long time, and that made their technology like really behind compared to the rest of the world.
Yes, no, it's really, you're right. And it's, and some of that isolation, I understand why they did it because they felt like, they were resisting Europeans who were colonizing the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you can go too far in the other direction. So they were very isolated for a while. And then it wasn't until like the 1800s when America basically came with gunboats and was like, listen, you're going to trade with us or we're going to just start firing. And, that it ultimately was good, that's not a nice way to do it, but like
Mm.
ultimately I think it was good for them to like open up and they've been, and like, Japan has had good and bad things happen over the many years, but they're largely, they've still retained their culture,
Mm.
which is a very unique and beautiful one. But at the same time, like it's a very technologically advanced country. I mean, like, that's where my PlayStation comes from, and and so many more things come from there. And they've got a good economy, and it's not like they don't have problems. Every country has problems, but like, but I think, yeah, that's a good point. It's a lesson in like you can't, trying to isolate for too long is not necessarily a good thing.
That's why I'm so advanced because I'm Japanese. I'm kidding. You're so like educated in history and stuff. I mean, you need to know all that for your job though, right?
I mean, to write comic books, like I mean, I don't think that's the most important thing. I mean, I think it depends what kind of stuff you write. Like, so I mean, for me, I have a lot of interest in writing historical stuff
Mm,
or things that have to do. So I've always loved learning, and so that definitely helps. But I think, you know, yes, that's important, but it's not like, I know comic writers that are, that are graduated law school, and I know comic book writers that never finished high school. And to me, it's about just just be wanting to learn, and
mm,
it's not about like what you were taught when you were younger. It's just like being curious about the world. But also, I think the best writers and the best artists are not just like book smart. They're smart about human nature, because ultimately every
yeah.
story, whether it's for a comic book that I'm selling at a convention or it's something I'm showing to the military or whoever, like, it has to be about human beings. You have to believe, and I think especially when I'm writing things like science fiction or horror or or a superhero story, whatever it is, like, the more fantastical the story I'm writing, the more important it becomes for the human characters to be believable. Because
Yeah.
it's like, feel like a reader will, or a viewer of a television show or a movie will be like, okay, I'll believe that there's dragons, but I won't believe that there's dragons if there's somebody who doesn't act like I think a person's going to act. If somebody
Mhm.
doesn't, have the same, you know, flaws that you and I have, might have, that like
Yeah.
we might be scared or, fall, or, want to fall in love and all these other stuff. And I think that's the most important thing is I think if you, I mean, that, just understanding human nature and just having experiences in life, being curious to learn that, and just like, I think just putting the work in.
Mhm.
I was my first comic didn't get published until I was 30, and which, may sound old, but I think is because you always hear stories about like, oh, this guy directed a movie when he was 22, and yeah, and like that happens, and and I think, but like the truth is like it takes a long time to get good. And some of it is talent and hard work, and some of it is always just luck, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I had to, I know I needed to spend like my 20s and younger, like doing a lot of bad writing before my writing would get better. But and I needed to write a lot, like, and I needed to learn how to like have a good work ethic and
Mm.
really be motivated to do it, and not just start things and not finish them, which is what I used to do when I started out. But it's also, I had to be in the right place at the right time. So like with my first comic book, um, I was lucky enough. I found a really amazing artist, Paul Azaceta. I've done two books with him. He's done covers on a bunch of my other books. He's still my one of my best friends in comics. I've known him, oh God, I've known him at least 20 years now. I had to
Wow.
like find a really great artist. And then
Mm,
I went to San Diego Comic-Con in 2004,
mm.
and I was lucky enough to get introduced to the head of Image Comics and get a
What?
chance to
That's so
pitch my
cool.
idea. Yeah, and it's just, it's Comic-Con was smaller then, so it was like, I mean, I still had to wait. I was there from like Wednesday till Sunday. I didn't get to have that meeting until the end of the day on Sunday.
Mm,
Um, but it took like me networking and like getting to the place where a friend of mine was in a position to introduce me. And then at that point, once I
mm,
had that moment, I had to have the right story. I had to have all the experience I had writing things that never got written, and then I had to have the right artist
yeah.
who was really good. And so, some of that was hard work, and some of that was as talent, and some of that is, is just was just luck, right? Like that. I happened to meet the right people, and I did put effort into it, and I put effort into networking. I don't like the term networking because I just like I mean, although I think that is a big part of comic conventions, like I just like meeting people, but I don't
Me
like
too.
the pressure of like, yeah, and it was one of the nice things about meeting you is like when I met you at first, like you didn't start right away by saying, "Hey, I have a podcast. Do you want to be on it?" We just
Mm-mm.
started having like a natural conversation. And then once you asked me, I was like, "Oh, you're an interesting person to talk to. Like, of course, I'd love to continue talking with you." And I feel like really when I think about like the connections I've made at comic conventions in particular, but also online, because
Mm.
for people who want to get into comics, like, if you don't have a comic convention in your city, or you can only go to one once a year, that's even whether it's in your city or in another place, like it's changed. Like, because when I start, but like meeting people online is still a way to meet people. I mean, if you can meet them in real life, I think it's always better. I still
Yeah.
believe in that, but also you know, I so many of the people that I met starting out were like back then it was before social media was around, but it was mostly just it was like message boards, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then it became social media, and I met people through Twitter before Twitter kind of got bad. But and now, but now there's like Discord, and there's still Facebook and things, and there's probably, whatever. There's TikTok, there's a million ways, but like if you're just looking at it as like, oh, I want to meet people that have the same interests as me.
Yeah.
And that was my goal with it was when I first started like up on these message boards, I wasn't like, oh, let me see who are the important people and like let me kiss their butt. Like I'm just not good at I'm just not good at that. Like I mean I can like if I can play the game if I have to, but I'm to me, it was just like, oh, you know, you're young, but it's like there was a time when comic books were not considered very cool. And it was just exciting for me to meet other people that, that were interested in comic books.
Mhm.
And it's turned out over the years that like, so I started being on these message boards in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like so many of the people that were on those message boards wound up becoming professionals in comics, wound up becoming writers, artists,
Mhm.
editors, publishers. And you know, it was we weren't trying to network, although at a certain point after we got like, writers would talk to artists about working together and things like that. But it's just like, oh, those connections have paid off years later
Mhm.
because like it was built from a place of genuine friendship, of genuinely like common interests and being like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I've known this person a long time. I can trust them and I know they're going to be reliable. I've seen what they can do and and I like that. And it's like, I always try to support, people who are starting out. Like if they come up to me at a convention, like I'll always have I'm there to sell books, but like, quite frankly, it's much more fun to just like talk to somebody and like, if I can give them advice, if they have questions or, I mean, and it's always changes. It's like, there's no one right way to break into the industry, but I like doing that. It's also why I like teaching is because I feel like so many people were very generous to me when I started out, whether they were teachers when I was in school or whether it was just people who in the industry who were like, you know, editors or writers that were more experienced at me that gave me a chance or gave me advice,
Mhm.
or, artists that were willing to work with me. So, I always try to like be as helpful as I can and try to like, pay it forward, I guess is the expression, right?
I agree with you 5,000%. I can't even like I feel like there's no like bone in me to kiss someone's butt. 'Cause like when someone doesn't want to hang out with me, I'm like, I don't want to hang out with you either. And then I just walk away. Even if they're like a big, big person, I don't like if I don't like being around them, I feel like it's not if they don't like being around me, like what's the point? You know?
I agree. And I think that's just a good lesson for life, right? Like, I mean, there's certain people you have to work with, if you don't, even if you don't like them, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, although in comics, I've been very lucky. Like, I've really gotten to work with really great people. It's very hard for me to think of people that I have anything bad to say about. I think I've
Yeah.
been very fortunate, but some of that is also just, yeah, I just, I've, I've gravitated towards people that are, yes, are talented, but are also going to be you think are going to be fun to work with. And I try to be that way myself, right? I try to be, because for 99% of the comics I do, I don't draw my own work. That means, the artist is always going to be like is always going to be, is my collaborator. And I apologize
Yeah.
that I have a phone going off in the background. I still have a
No worries.
landline. But you know, when I'm working with an artist, I try to not just give them a script and just say, here, do this. I always try to tell them like, hey, here's a script, or even before that, sometimes depending on how early I'm working with them in the process, because sometimes I have an idea and I'll talk with the writer, but other times, and I pick the artist myself, sorry, but other times I work with if I'm working for a publisher, they might just assign me an artist.
Yeah.
But always early on, I will tell them, like, here's my idea or here's my script, but like, this isn't set in stone. If you
Mhm.
want to change something, let's talk about it. And I actually like when an artist is like, you know what? I like this story, but I think we can. What if you tried this, or what if like I think it could do this better. And my favorite part of the job actually is
Mhm.
not. I yes, I love when my comics come out. Like I'm very proud of it. Like especially when my first comic came out, although it still hasn't worn off. Was like I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I have a comic. And I was like, it's in print. Like nobody can ever take this away from me, you know? And
Mhm.
like, and I still feel that way. But to me, my favorite part is when the artwork comes in before anybody else sees it other than the editor, right? Like, um, because that's the moment when I see something that has been in my head for weeks, months, years, and I see them bring it to life. And I will tell you that, and I've worked with more artists than I can remember.
Mhm.
And almost every time it's better than what I imagined it was going to be because they just bring something amazing to it. It's still like magic to me. When I when I was at Emerald City, I was sitting in an artist alley table by myself, but when I get to share a table with one of the artists I work with, it's one of my favorite things because I'll look over and I'll see them draw, and to me, even though I've been learning to draw over the past 5 years, it's like I see them draw something out of their head, and to me, it is still like magic. It is like how do you do that? Because I draw, but I use a lot of reference, which is fine, and
Yeah.
professional artists use references too. But just like, wow, it's just so amazing. And but I where this was all coming from was just the idea of like I want it to be a fun experience for my artists. I want them, even just on a selfish level of like, I want them to be able to work with me again. But I also know like, you know, it's nobody is doing comics for the money, like
Yeah.
I do like getting paid for it, but it's like there are easier ways to make a lot of money,
Mhm.
right? And but they're doing it because they love it. And so I want their experience to be good. And I feel like they'll do their best work when they're good. I know that I do my
Definitely.
best work if somebody's like, that isn't just telling me you have to write exactly this. If they're like, you know, maybe they're not going to just say write anything you want, but they might be like, okay, give us your best idea, and then we'll go back and forth on it. So I want my artists to feel like that, and anytime I get to work with an artist again, I'm always take it as a huge compliment that like, okay, well, they must have not hated working with me because they must have liked it, right? Like if they're working with me again, and
Mhm.
hopefully my artists take it as a compliment as well when I get to work with them again. It's always hard because everybody's got different schedules and it takes an artist a lot longer to draw a page than it takes me to write one. So, I might be working on more than one project at once while they might be
Mhm.
working out one at the same time, but it's a lot of fun.
I agree with you because I feel like when you enjoy writing it or drawing it, other people like to look at it, you know?
I think so too. I think, look, if somebody's, there are times when people are really professional and they just have to get a job done. But most of the time, I think you can really tell sometimes when somebody
Mhm.
really, when they're working on something that they love. I feel like I can tell it, like when the people are having a good time. And it same goes for acting or whatever creative thing.
Yeah.
Um, and and you want to think that the person on the other, I mean, I know I've got a lot of respect because I know that for writers, like it used to be, I would like, I'd read comics I didn't like, and I'd be like, I can't believe they're still letting this person write this comic. This is before I became a professional. And then I started writing, and I'm like, oh, even writing or drawing a bad comic is really hard. And
Yeah.
so, and there could be a million reasons why something either I don't like it or is not good. And it might not be, and you might think, well, okay, the writer isn't just very good, but it might be that they're on a really tight deadline, or the publisher is giving them too many notes, or they're getting different notes. They're getting one note from the editor, they're getting one note from the publisher, they're getting another note from the artist. And so it's just as it's hard work. It takes a lot of time to get good at it. And often, writers are often working on multiple projects at once.
Hmm.
And that can be a hard, and it's something I'm always trying to balance. Like I'm usually, it's very, you have to be doing really well to be as a writer, especially to be able to like live off only working on like one book at a time. And
Hmm.
I've got my teaching work, I've got the futurist work sometimes that like, okay, that means I don't always have to rely on my writing. So that means I can be more choosy. But a lot of times people have to take on like four books at a time. And it's like, if you're doing that, if you're trying to write four books a month, like unless you're really good and also you just have no time for a life outside of that, like the quality is probably going to suffer
Hmm.
because, it's just really hard to do that kind of work. But just the way the industry is sometimes people don't have a choice.
Do you ever like have to compromise your creativity, like through an editor or or deadline?
All the time. Yeah. And which is not necessarily a bad thing. So like, I'll tell you the bad part first, right? Like, so I
Yeah.
remember there's an editor I did for a Marvel book, and I won't say which one, but like, and I don't think the editor was a bad person, but it was like I was getting so many notes. It was the editor's idea for the story,
Mm.
which is fine. And like I knew I was coming in to write. And also when you write for Marvel or DC, as opposed to most of the stuff I do, um, that they own the characters. They're their
Yeah.
characters. They're going to be they were there before me. They're going to be there after me. So you come in with a
Mhm.
certain amount of it. But this particular editor was like, he was giving me so many notes that I wanted to say, like, oh, you should write the story yourself. I didn't say that, but like that was what I was thinking because I really didn't want to get fired. But like,
Yeah.
and I felt like, you know, um, it's not that their idea was good, but it was just like, wow, I'm getting so micromanaged that I don't think that I did my best work.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I usually like working with editors because um and because I've also worked with on books where I have no editor, it's just me and the artist. And I think that's been good, but like a good editor will like see things in my story that I don't see, like yeah, maybe like typos and things like that, yes, but also might be like, you know what, this character isn't really working for me. Like, have you thought about doing this? Or, and especially I think it helps when you have writers that have or editors that have like different life experiences and different skill sets than me. So like I've liked working with like I've some of the best editors I've worked with are women. Um, and I don't think it's anything genetic. But I do think part of the reason is because like they have a completely different life, not completely, but a lot of different life experience that I haven't had because I'm not a woman and I don't, I haven't had certain experiences. So they might be like, you know, yes, with women characters, but not with every, they're going to bring to it a perspective and it might not,
Yeah.
maybe it's not gender, maybe it's just, they come from another country or whatever. I mean, I've worked with a lot of artists from different countries from like, I'm working on a book now with an artist from Rome. I've worked with from Italy. I've worked with a bunch of artists from Italy. I've worked with artists from South America. Um, I've worked with artists from like the Middle East. And even if it may not necessarily be coming across in like dialogue because they're not writing it, but like their artistic lens is going to be inspired by, yes, some of the same things because like American pop culture is all over the world, but like, but by other things that I've never seen and by experiences. And I think it's really great to have that. And so, to come back to the editor thing, like, yeah, there's compromises you have to make. Look, you know, I could always, I'm trying to think like deadlines are part of it. Like sometimes it's just like, okay, I have to get it done. And like, oh, I wish I had time to to put this aside for a month and come back to it and look at it again. But
Yeah.
like, if I did that, I might not ever publish anything because
Yeah.
I'd be a perfectionist. I think the other thing, the compromise is also is just like the like page count, where it's like, oh, I always kind of wish I had unlimited pages, but it's
Yeah.
like usually most comic book issues are 20 or 22 pages,
Mhm.
and most series, I usually write mini series, so it's usually like 5 or 6 issues. So, it's like 100 to 120 pages that
Mhm.
I'm writing. And, you know, a lot of times I'm like, oh, I could just use one more page. I could have this, or give me 5 more pages and I could tell this other part of the story. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm compromising, but ultimately, like, I think having some kind of like limits can sometimes help you become more creative because it makes you really then think about like, okay, if I can only do 20 pages, what are the best 20 pages that I can do? Right. So
Yeah.
maybe it means I have to cut something out, but like the thing that I'm going to cut out will probably be something that wasn't as important to the story, and I'll give more room, hopefully, to something that is important.
I feel like it becomes concise and like, more focused sometimes.
Yes. No, I definitely think it does. And I think because especially the way my mind works is like I'll go off on tangents or like, and I could just if I left to my own devices, my stories would be ridiculously long. And
Hmm.
that means paying an artist to draw all those pages.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
means it
yeah.
takes longer to come out. And like, and just hopefully it helps. And hopefully, like working with good editors, working with good artists and good other, good publishers, like it helps make it more concise. And also, I also realize readers are busy, right? And
Hmm.
just like, and we're all busy. It's like, I have so many comics and books and TV shows and movies that like are on my list of to read or to watch.
Hmm.
And like, I know everybody is like that. And so a reader's time is really valuable. So you try to give them the most you can in the smallest amount that you can so that like they feel like, you know, whatever time they're spending on it is well spent.
That's so funny you say that because I was like working on a film yesterday and I realized that I have like too many shots. So I was like cutting down all the shots that are like unnecessary, you know? And it felt more concise afterwards.
I think so. It's one of the, I think it's one of the like they always say for movies like a movie really never really fully comes alive until the editing, right? Until and of
Mm,
course you always shoot more than you can, than you can actually, you write more than you can shoot, you shoot more than you can edit, and then you finally get to something. But I think, and it's the same thing with me where like when I write a comic book, I'm writing probably, when I'm writing more than I'll ultimately wind up using in the script. And then the artist and I will work together and decide. And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, you did this in this number of panels. How about if we did it in a shorter number? And now that
mm,
I'm drawing my own work, it's or for the first time, like it's becoming an interesting thing where it's like, okay, this is how I thought it would be when I write the script. But like, oh, now either, yeah, this page, like it's actually weirdly kind of been sometimes the opposite where I'm like, oh, not enough is happening on this page. It's really boring. Or, oh, I just assume that the reader is just going to know that this person got from here to there. And actually, I need to add a panel to show what happened. Or I need to
yeah.
add some panels um, to really like let a moment breathe. Like,
Mm,
because like sort of space is time on a comic book page, like
yeah.
versus like in a movie where it's time is time, right? And it's
Mm,
like, oh, if you really want somebody to like sit with an emotion, you kind of have to like have a few panels of that person experiencing that emotion instead of just one, because otherwise somebody will flip past it. But when I'm writing, it is more like, okay, I've got to cut stuff. And so when I was writing the script of the thing that I'm going to draw, like I know I've written more pages than I'm actually going to use. And I know
mm,
I based it on a short story that I wrote and I cut a lot of that story out because I was like, okay, I know I can only draw a certain number of pages if I want to get it done this year. But also, I want to, what are the most important things of this in this story? What does the reader need to know? What is something, yeah, I think is cool, but like really, can we skip it and still, and the reader still experience the same emotions? Like, so it's tricky like that, but that's part, and that's part of the process. And I think the thing is, hopefully, I'd like to think I've gotten better at it the more that I've written, where, um, you know, I hopefully I learn like earlier on in the process, okay, this should be cut, this should stay. But again, that's why it's still like having editors. I still like having somebody else being like, you know what, I think you're spending a little too much time here, but we need more of this.
mm.
And of course, whenever I get any note, I'm like, oh, you don't know what I don't say this out loud, but in my head, I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. I thought about this so hard. And then I take a day and whatever it is, I'll fix it. And sometimes it's easier than others, but like ultimately, usually they're right. Most of the times they're, the person who's giving me the notes is right.
Sometimes I feel like um when I write my story or read my story, I know everything that's going on. I know what I'm talking about. But then someone else reads it, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, why is this happening? You know what I mean?
Yes, no, and I think that's why it's important. Like, even if you don't have an editor, it's so important to show people your work like that because I think same thing happens to me where it's like you take for granted, especially it's a story you've been working on, right? It's been in your
Mhm.
head for a long time. You know these characters, you know what's going inside in your head, and what you write on the page, you might think like, okay, everybody knows this character, like secretly hates their brother, right? Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
and they're going to be able to tell because of the expression on their face. But like, you know what? Like, they might not, so and it's a lot of times that happens to me. Here's where it happens to me a lot is like a lot of times I will write a sequence in a comic book
Mm-hmm.
that has no words in it, right? It's just this is what's happening. The artist is going to draw it. And then I get the art back, and the artist hasn't done anything wrong, but I'm like, I read it even before an editor reads it, although sometimes this happens and the editor catches it too. And I'm like, you know what? I thought the reader was going to understand what's going on in this thing. I thought they'd be able, and I realized, no, I have to go back in and I have to add either dialogue or I have to add narration. And it's never the artist's fault. Like, I think a bad writer would be like, well, the artist didn't draw this in the right way and it's like, no, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
give the artist enough to work with to do it. I didn't
Yeah.
give the reader enough to work with. And the good thing about comics that you can't do in film is like, I can keep changing the dialogue until the last minute because it's just like lettering is done by computer now. So it's like, and letterers do a lot of work and they don't get credited to it, but it's one of the easier things to fix. Whereas like in a movie, you can't change in a movie, you can't change if you change the dialogue, it seems really weird, right? You either have to
Yeah.
like to another character or you have to like dub the lines in. So somebody's speaking in weird words. Now, on the other hand, in movies, in film, you can rearrange the order of the scenes. You can use another shot, and it's like comics, it's a lot harder to do that. If I want
Yeah.
that to happen, I have to ask the artist to redraw a panel or redraw a page, and I almost never do that. Um, Mostly because it's so time consuming for them to do that. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can re it's I can write like 10 different versions of the dialogue of the same page in this, and it still won't take me as long as it takes them to write, just like to redraw one panel. And sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes there's miscommunication or we thought something is going to work and there's just no way to fix it with dialogue. Like it happened where there was a scene where it's supposed to be a surprise that somebody's injured in their back. And like, oh, but like the first panel shows them injured in their back. And I was like, there's no way for you not to have to change this. And I felt really bad, but like the artists understood. And I try to make those requests very infrequently because I don't want them to think like, because I could always look at the entire thing and find, oh, well, how about doing this different and that different? And it's like, but you have to be respectful of people's time in the same way, like an editor could ask me to rewrite something 50 million times. And in comics, that hasn't been a lot, but when I've written screenplays, like um, I adapted one of my comics into a screenplay, and I think I did three full drafts of it,
Mm-hmm.
and probably more even than that. And like by the end of that process, I was so sick of writing that story. And I'm not saying that the changes they were asking for weren't good. I think ultimately
Yeah.
the final version of that script was the best version, but it was like, oh man, it's not like I don't enjoy rewriting if I don't have, I mean, and of course it is part of the job, but like at a
Yeah.
certain point, it gets to be diminishing returns for me where it's like a couple rewrites, it's like I'll be good, but like I'll be like, oh, I've been in this story too much. Like it's like I need to like get out of my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what this reminds me of? I think you showed me your storyboard and you're like, oh, this guy's holding a gun. And I literally didn't know because it was like a wide shot, right?
Right. No, and but it is stuff like that. No, I actually remember you pointing that
Yeah.
out. You were kind of, and I appreciated it because it's like, you need to know like the point of that particular scene is like the gun is supposed to be like the last thing we see in the scene because the character's looking for something and then like, well, the entire scene doesn't work if you can't tell it's a gun, right? And
Yeah.
now some of it might be because like you saw, like my storyboards are pretty much like kind of stick figures, but like at the end of the day, though, like when I do draw it for real, and even though hopefully the drawing will look better, like it's still going to be the same shot unless I make sure that it's clear. And that's a very important
Yeah.
thing. Like not only does that page not work, but like that gun is sort of like almost like a character in the story, like because you're worried about whether he's going to use it, who he's going to use it on. And like, so, that clarity is really important. But again, like you said, I was so close to that story because that's a story I wrote as a short story just with words, like a prose short
Mm,
story in college. Then I made it into a screenplay and a play once. The play never got produced, but like, and then I put it aside for probably 20 years. And when I was looking for something to draw this year, I was like, okay, I picked that particular story in part because it's personal to me, but in part
mm,
also because it's just like a handful of characters. It takes place in like regular locations. It takes place in like Florida, like in a retirement community. And I was like, okay, I don't have to worry about drawing like an entire city. I don't have to worry about drawing a million spaceships. I can just focus, and it's still going to be hard, right?
yeah.
And I'm working with, you know, I've been a writer for, professionally for almost 20 years now, but like I only really started taking drawing seriously during the pandemic. And I think I might have told you this in person. Like
Yeah.
I always loved drawing and I would take classes once in a while, like a life drawing class. But like during the pandemic, I was like, some people decided they wanted to learn how to make banana bread and I really enjoyed that. But for me, I was like, all right, I have all this time now. Um, like I'm gonna like learn how to draw. And so I started to YouTube tutorials, then I started taking classes online and I'm still learning and I'm still working with like an art mentor
Mhm.
who's been like every other week I will show him my storyboards and he'll go through all of them and he'll either say like he'll look at things and be like, okay, this is an interesting panel, but like, have you thought about what if you shot it from this perspective, right?
Mhm.
Or yeah, like, okay, you're only focused on this one person. What if you do like in movies, you see like a lot of over the shoulder shots. I think
Mm,
you need people in this panel so we remember that they're both looking at each other. And then it's like, okay, think about how it all comes together as a page, right? Are
mm.
there too many panels that have similar shots? Or, um, are you giving enough space to this moment? And it's really interesting. And there is a lot of overlap with film and you can't see, but in the bookcases that are I'm facing that are away from the camera. So behind me are all my like role playing game stuff. On the other side, graphic novels, but also I have all these film books and I bought all these storyboard books because
Oh my
like
God.
there's a bunch from like Alfred Hitchcock movies, there's one from Star Wars movies, and then the guy who did Parasite, I want to say his name is Bong Joon-ho. I hope I'm not pronouncing his name.
Yeah.
He did this book. It's almost like a comic book because it's all the storyboards for the entire movie. And
I want it. Okay.
it's so yeah, I recommend it. I mean, and I think, especially if you want to make film, like it's really interesting to see the choices that make and before I even sat down to draw this, like I studied and I'm still learning about like composition in shots, right? And like,
Mhm.
okay, where is the horizon line? Are we looking up? Are we looking down? Right? Like,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, okay, you can't make everything uh too symmetrical, right? Like
Yeah.
try to have people on different levels or in different places. Okay, you can frame people in doorways and have people pointing, and it's changed the way like I watch movies, just learning this stuff. Like
Yeah.
that's been one of the fun things is like, oh, things that were maybe I was aware of subconsciously. Now I'm like, oh, I can point them out. And I still have so much to learn. Like, at the end of the day, hopefully I finish this. It'll still be my first comic. And, when I think about like, um, first that I've drawn, like it's scary that I'm telling people that I'm doing it. Like I've told you and I've put it in my news. I have a newsletter. Um, if anybody, it's like Mark Sable on Substack. You can find it. Like I put it in there, and part of the reason I put it in there was like to kind of force myself to do it because if I
Mhm.
announce it, then it's like, oh, people will ask about it, and that means I can't. So far I haven't like lost steam on it. I'm still very excited, but I know there's always going to be points when I'm going to be like, and even in a little bit, because sometimes it's like the way that I've been working is I've been drawing like for every panel, I've been drawing like three different versions. And like
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, all right,
Yeah,
enough.
I saw that.
It's
I saw that. Yeah.
yeah, but it's like if if I know that people are going to read, this is where things like deadlines help. Like when
Yeah.
you know that somebody is expecting something from you, that either there's going to be money at the end of it, or people
Mhm.
are going to read it, or I've promised it, people are going to ask about it. it does help. It helps
Yeah, yeah,
motivate.
yeah.
I'm usually pretty good at self-motivating, but but sometimes it does still help to have, to help to have that external motivation.
Hmm.
And it's I, at the end of the day, if it's a comic that, you know, at the end of the day, it's a learning experience more than anything else. I hope it'll make me a better writer.
Hmm.
I don't think I'm going to be changing careers and I'm going to throw my writing away and just start drawing comics.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be something. Hopefully, it'll just be something that I'm proud of, and hopefully that can entertain other people.
Mhm.
But I've been lucky enough to the good thing is I've been lucky enough to work with so many talented artists that hopefully some of it's rubbed off on me. The hard part about it is it makes me very hard on myself because that's who I'm comparing myself to. And the artists I've been working with have put in years and years and tens of thousands of hours or whatever to get as good as they've gotten.
Yeah.
And, I can't expect to get that good in, you know, in a year or in 5 years since, I guess, since I've been, 2020 is when I started learning how to draw for taking
Mhm.
it seriously. But I love it. And it's been fun and it's got me like, I think again, it's changed the way I watch movies. It's changed the way I read comic books and how I look at the art when it comes in. And so it's been a good experience.
I mean, I think it's really good. Plus, it like helps you understand the artist you're working with better, right?
Yeah, it definitely helps. And it's given me so much more appreciation. I mean, I've always appreciated artists.
Mm.
Because like I said before, it seems like magic to me what they do. And I just think they're really talented.
A
Also,
magician.
yeah, I know how much, I also know how much work that they put into it,
Mm.
like, and just how much time they put into it. But wow, did I not realize even like just to get one page of a comic done, it's so much work and you've got to know so many things. And so I have so much more appreciation than I already did, and I had quite a bit, but the more I do it, the more I'm like, wow, like it's the thought that they have to put into even having a script
Mhm.
because I'm writing a script in pretty much the same way that I would be giving it to an artist. It's a little different. Like I'll give an artist reference sometimes, but then so I'm looking up my own reference. But at the end of the day, like as much work as I put into the script and as much, like hopefully the story is there, it's like they have to imagine everything that's in that scene, right? Like I can say that, okay, this is an apartment and this is what's in the apartment, but they have to think about every single object and where it is and keep track of it. And then think about
Mhm.
like, well, okay, this character is doing this in the apartment, maybe with another character, maybe what's the best way to shoot this angle, I'm using film terms, but it's the same thing, right? Like
Yeah.
what's the best way to like what's the best angle to do this from? Like, where's the light coming from? How do
Mhm.
you do this in perspective? And that's just all that's just in your head. And then you have to execute it and
Yeah.
it has to look good. And then to have to do that on a deadline, like I've given myself the deadline of like this year to finish my comic, but like if I don't finish it this year, like I could finish it next year and like I'm not gonna fire myself. But
Yeah.
like, the artists that I work with, like that's their living, right? Like they have to finish it so they can get paid and then they can move on to the next project. And
Mhm.
so it's truly amazing. And I just feel so blessed that I've been able to work with such as such good artists as I have.
Did you like always kn knew that you were gonna be a writer?
I don't think I always knew I was going to be a writer. I knew I always loved writing. I
Mm.
think I always loved writing. I always loved being creative and art. And I would write even in like elementary and high school. I would write for fun, not
Mm.
thinking like, but I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And I thought
I know you
maybe I was
took
going to
law
go into
school, right?
politics. And I did go to law school. Yeah, that's another story. But like it wasn't until the end of high school that I was like, oh, maybe, and I could be a writer. Um, and and then in college, I took a lot of creative writing. And even then, I didn't think about comic books as writing. And it wasn't until I went to college, then I went to grad school for what's called dramatic writing. I got
Mhm.
master's degree,
Mm.
and that's like screenplays, plays, and TV. And then I tried to become a writer, like a screenwriter, and I just wasn't having a lot of luck. I think some of it is because I was not in LA. Some of
Mhm.
it was I just like wasn't good enough, and I hadn't had enough life experience,
Mm.
didn't have enough, like didn't hadn't really gotten down structure, and there's a bunch of other things. But then I kind of panicked, and I was like in my mid 20s, and I was like, oh my God, I haven't made it as a writer, which is silly now. And I went to law school. I was miserable in law school, and I took one of my screenplays, um, and that's when I started to see, okay, comic book movies are happening now. So I was like, oh, what if I turn the screenplay into a comic book? Then maybe it'll become a movie. And
Mm.
that's when I found Paul, the artist, and and then the first book got published. And when I started writing comics, I thought, okay, well, this will just be my way. Comics will just be my way of getting into the movie industry.
That's
And
amazing right now.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And I've been lucky. Like I have sold the rights to a bunch of my comics. Nothing has gotten made, but I've gotten paid
Yeah.
for it. To film and TV. But like, um, what I found is actually I really like working in comics because I have like one of my best friends
Mm.
is a screenwriter, and he's done movies that people have seen, but he's also written stuff that he's gotten paid a lot of money for, but just doesn't get made because more scripts get made than get bought, and more scripts get written than get purchased, and
Yeah.
then more scripts get purchased than get made. And then, more things get like, made than actually get distributed and seen. And so like with comics, I mean, yeah, there are still things I write that don't ever see the light of day, but most of the things I do get written, and it's a smaller audience than movies, but
Yeah.
there's a really good feeling about having something out in the world and having
Yeah.
somebody like, I've been doing it long enough, like that's now when I come to Seattle, to Seattle for Emerald City, or I go to New York Comic Con or San Diego
Mm.
Comic Con, like, or wherever. It's like, yes, it's fun to sell new books, and that's part of why I'm there. And I'm always kind of like, I feel bad if I don't have a new book out, but like, it's nice if somebody comes up and is like, oh, hey, like I already bought your books. I'm not going to buy anything, but like, I just want to tell you, I really like this thing that you did a year ago or 5 years ago or
Mm.
15 years ago. That means a lot. Like the fact that because it happened to me last time I was at New York Comic Con, like somebody had read, they told me, they're like, yeah, I read your first comic when the guy told me he read it when he was in junior high school and like middle school. And it made me feel old, but it made me feel so amazing because I'm like, wow, because he was like easily in his 20s at that point. And I was like, wow, like the fact that that story stuck with you and you remember that means that myself and the artist and everybody else involved in it, but like we did something right. Like we told a
Yeah.
story, and I know as a reader that, and as somebody who watches movies, like, that's what I think great art and entertainment can do is it's things that stick with you. And it's still, and I think one of the fun things about comics and cool things is like the line between fan and like the person who makes it is also uh isn't as hard or long or whatever. It's isn't as thin as is isn't as thick as it is in like it's hard to, like, if you wanted to meet the people who make your favorite movies, it's a lot. You probably have to come to Los Angeles, and it's like, and then it's hard. Like there's not usually, actors aren't usually like, I mean, if an actor comes to a comic convention, you got to
You
wait
have to
for like a
pay.
year online and pay $1 million. And
Yeah.
and even then, like the top actors are just generally not gonna like sign stuff. But like at a comic convention, I've been able to meet like so many of my heroes, and usually they've been, almost always they're super nice. And like
Mm.
you can also like, and then I've gone and seen like, oh, I've gone from one side of it to the other. I've seen other people who've come up to me as fans before, and then they become, and it's an inspiring thing. Not that you can't do that in film. It's just, but um, but it's one of the reasons I do like going to comic conventions is because it has that kind of special atmosphere where you can meet people who are doing the thing you love. And then it turns out most of us are also fans, and
Yeah.
we like talking about that stuff, and it still makes it a fun place to go to.
Who are your like heroes in comics?
That's a good question, and it changes. I mean, definitely Alan Moore, who created Watchmen,
Mm.
is and a lot of other things, is definitely one of the writers I like the most. Um, oh, I'm trying to think. That's a good question. I mean, I also, I grew up loving the X-Men, so Chris Claremont um, wrote them. With artists, I love Mike Mignola, who does Hellboy.
Mhm.
Um, I also like there's somebody. Oh God, I'm blanking on the name, and I need to look. But Dave Mazzucchelli, who did Batman Year One, Frank Miller, who wrote Batman Year One, and who did Sin City, and then drew like The Dark Knight Returns. I'm sure I'm leaving out so many people. That's sort of so I'm feeling bad about it.
Mhm.
There's also like a lot of like smaller artists that people might not have heard of. So there's a guy named Adrian Tomine, I think is his name.
The
Um,
Japanese guy.
yeah, he's Japanese, and he did something called Optic Nerve, and there was a movie that was based on one of the stories, and I can't think of what it was. Oh, Shortcomings. That's I
Mhm.
think it was. I think it was Shortcomings is the movie that got made based on it. But like, because I was naming all like superhero people, but like I like his stuff. He's really brilliant. He writes and draws his own stories, and they're all like just like slice of life stuff. There's no science fiction or anything else in them. They're just like real people in the real world. And sometimes they're based on him and it's
Mhm.
about the Asian American experience. But a lot of times they're just stories about just like regular people, like somebody who works at a video store or, or a supermarket. And they're beautiful stories. Like, and they're heartbreaking. But like, that's kind of stuff inspires me. And I like that there are, like superhero comics are still great. Like I'm not,
Mhm.
there's nothing against them, but I like reading stuff that's different too. And so he's somebody I haven't gotten to meet. I did see him to meet. I saw him at a convention, but he was busy signing. And then when I came back, he was gone. So
Okay.
I'm also, it's funny because even though I'm a professional, I still feel like sometimes shy about approaching people. Like if
No,
I'm
me too.
introduced, I don't mind, but like, I'm like, oh, on the one hand, I don't want to bother them. And also, like, I kind of want them to know that I'm also in the business and I'm not just a fan, but I also don't want to brag about it. And then I don't want them to be like, I never heard of you.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
okay because it's also, there's so many comic writers and artists that, like, there are people that I don't, there are always new people coming in. There are people that I don't know about, and it doesn't mean their work isn't any good.
Mhm.
It's just also some people only read Marvel comics or only read DC comics or only read whatever. So, um, anytime anybody has read something I've written, I'm always excited about it. But
Yeah.
so
You know, it's
cool.
funny. I was like nervous when I came up to you too. I was like, oh, what's the comic about? You know?
It's funny to me, but it's also something I try to be aware of is like I hope people I come across as approachable because I do want people to come up and talk and because I've walked by sometimes when you're just like, oh, I don't want to bother that person. They don't look like
Yeah,
they're in
yeah.
a mood or they look like they're really busy. And the truth is, you never know what's going on. They could have just gotten a phone call that like, their cat is sick or something or whatever. And like sometimes even at this convention, like I was in between selling books and talking to people, I was drawing because I knew I needed that time to get that stuff done. And I was like, oh, I wonder how many people didn't come up to me because they thought I was busy drawing. And maybe I need to have a sign that was like, come talk to me. Don't worry, don't mind me drawing. Like I know I need to look up more. But at the same time, like if I'm at a comic convention for 4 days, if I just stand there, especially if I'm by myself, like and just stare at people, like I will go nuts. Like I have to like move around. I have to I try not to look at my phone too much because like that's, nobody wants to approach
Yeah.
anybody that's looking at a phone. And I know it can be kind of rude, but like, but then sometimes I get a text or it's from somebody else that wants to meet me there or whatever. And so, um, but yeah, it's funny to me that you were nervous. Because I'm like, well, I'm not nobody to get nervous about, but I get it because I'm the same way, and it doesn't even mean somebody's necessarily big. It just means like, oh, I really appreciate their work
Mhm.
and like you don't want to come across silly to them or whatever, but like I think most people at conventions were used to like a lot you're normal, but like there are a lot of
What do
socially
you
awkward people
mean?
at conventions and I've been one of them, so I don't mind saying that, like, so
Mhm.
you know it's just as like it's okay, like we're all there to have fun. I guess we're there to business, but really it
Yeah.
should be a celebration of like the fact that these are this art form that we all really love and like
Mhm.
we get to talk about it and share our work, and I think that hopefully it should be a cool thing. But I get being nervous.
Yeah. I think that sign is actually a really good idea. You should put one. You should just write on paper, fold in half. I'm free. Come talk to me. Because I feel like that would I would actually be like relieved if I saw that personally.
It's yeah, I think I'm really seriously thinking about it, especially if I wind up at a convention where I'm drawing again, because that's a
Yeah.
kind of a new thing. I mean, I've sometimes if I was bored at a convention, I would just like sketch people that are standing around. But
Mhm.
that's sort of like like I'd have a little tiny notebook like to do
Yeah.
that. It was different than me like, okay, I had an iPad open on one hand where I was looking at reference of like what locations look like, and then like my notebook open on another.
Yeah.
And I can see why people would just be like, oh, that person, not even that that they think I'm rude, but like, oh, it looks like they're working really hard. And
Yeah, like on a commission or something,
yeah. And so when it's actually, no, I'm just trying to make the time go by faster
Yeah.
when nobody's coming by, and I'm happy actually when people come by and talk. That's the fun of it. Otherwise I could do everything else from home.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. What's funny? This reminds me of like this like little experiment I saw someone do. They tried to like walk around with a name tag on them for like a year to compare and see how people would interact with them with a name tag and without. And they found out that when they have a name tag with their name on, they seem more approachable than without it. 'Cause it's like a little bit of information about yourself already revealed, right?
I like that. That is true. Like I always am happy when I go to an event or a party and there's name tags. First of all, because I'm terrible at remembering people's names. Like
Yeah.
literally after somebody first tells me their name, I forget it immediately and I have to ask again. But then sometimes too much time passes and you don't want to be that. But you're right. There's something about it. Like it's definitely easier to start a conversation with somebody if you know their name, or better yet, if you know a little thing about them. Like I like sometimes when they're like, oh, write one thing about yourself, whether it's your job or your favorite, whatever. And it's
Mhm.
like, it makes conversation easier. And especially like after we're also isolated in the pandemic and we're also used to just talking to people on social media or on
Yeah.
text or whatever, I feel like maybe we've all forgotten how to like, talk in person a little bit. Like not you, you were very good about, you're very,
Guild.
gregarious person, and sociable person, but I feel like, all of us maybe have forgotten a little bit about that. And so like, yeah, it's funny. Maybe we should have people wear name tag. I guess I do have a badge, but it doesn't usually have my name on it at a convention.
You can write like, "Hey, I'm Mark," right here, and then people would be like, "Oh, I should go talk to Mark because I know his name already."
I do have I usually have the sign with my name behind it, but
Mm.
but sometimes people are just like, there's so many signs that
Yeah.
becomes like background noise that you don't notice.
And then sometimes, like, I remember I got embarrassed once. I think I made a mistake. Like, someone's name was on there, but it was like the artist, and they switched seats. And I was like, "You lied to me. I thought you were Dylan, not Terry. What is going on here?" You know?
But that happens like I don't I'm used to like being on the other end of it. I don't mind where it's like, first of all, it's most of the people in Artist Alley are artists and not writers. So I always
Yeah.
feel like I've had to stop myself from like apologizing because I'm always like, I'll always say something like, "Oh, just so you know, I'm the writer, not the artist."
Mhm.
Like, and I'll say something like, "Well, yeah, I can't take credit for the art, but I can take credit for having good taste in art."
Yeah.
And I do feel like sometimes I'm disappointing people because I don't do commissions or I'm not selling original art or prints, um, but ultimately there are, what I found is like, even though it's Artist Alley, there are people who do want to talk about their writing.
Yeah.
And, but given the choice, I'm always so much happier when I'm sharing the table with the artist,
Yeah.
right? Like, because I mean, then first of all, it's somebody to talk to, but also, and I think it's a draw. Like you know, I think it's a draw when people come to see somebody at the table drawing,
Mhm.
um, and they're doing it in a bigger book than I am, and they're drawing like really nice art, and it's like it's a cool thing, and it's like it's weird. Like I have the sign behind me and it always will have some artwork on it, but it's artwork that I didn't draw. Like
Yeah.
and I'm honest about it, but it is like, I never want to feel like I'm disappointing somebody that they're like, oh, we came because you have this, this cool, like, this cool art behind you, but oh, I'm like, I can sell you the book, but I can't, And I can tell you what it's about, but I can't make a drawing for you about it, or at least not a very good one.
Yeah. And plus, if the artist right next to you, you can like explain every aspect of your story, right? You can be like, "Oh, I drew because of this, and then I wrote because of this, and then we combined it," you know?
And honestly, sometimes I learn things like listening to an artist talk about the book that I've worked on to a stranger.
Mm,
Because even though we've worked together, first of all, most of it is, it's very rare that I work with an artist that lives in the same city. So most of our work is like, we're either sending emails, maybe we're talking on the phone, sometimes we're not even talking directly to each other. We're talking through an editor. And
mm,
so, there, even though I try to go back and forth with them, there are still things that like, oh, that maybe we didn't talk about, that things that they did, or I didn't know why. And, sometimes I'll ask them in person, but other times it's just, a fan will come up and ask them a question that like I didn't think of asking. And
mm.
so I like that. And it's also just, it's fun to like, I do like spending time with other creative people. It really is fun. And it really is one of the perks of the job for sure.
Do you have an example of like something you learned or a question that was like, "Oh, I never thought of asking that to my artist."
Oh, that's a good. I feel bad that I can't think of one. Because I haven't sat with an artist in a while. That's really why it is. Not because I've definitely, you know, learned so many things by talking to artists. I can't think of a specific one. But I will say I think again, learning how to draw now, like I've start to notice things
Mm,
like just like, oh, okay, especially about framing and shots. Like that's been the biggest thing that I've learned is like, oh, I'll like see like, yeah, it's only supposed to be one character in the scene, but I'll see that there's like black on the bottom, and I'll be like,
yeah.
oh, okay, he's doing that because it's putting it in a frame, or like, oh, I didn't necessarily say there was a doorway in the scene, but like they'll have the character standing in the doorway because that helps draw the eye to it, or
Yeah.
there'll be a branch from a tree like pointing to a character because it helps
I
direct the
do
eye,
that.
right? And
I do that.
it's stuff that you know, I don't know how many years I was writing comics, and like I still haven't written that in a scene, and maybe I will, but like artists have added that, knowing that it's going to help the reader,
Mhm,
and knowing that it's going to make a more interesting composition. And so, um, it's been, that's the kind of thing I've learned. Um, it's interesting. I guess one thing I've learned just talking, I was talking to one of the artists I'm working with. So I did a book called Chaotic Neutral, which it's half comic book and half Dungeons and Dragons adventure
yeah.
that people can play. And so the artist's name is Chris Anderson, and he does live in LA, and we play in a Dungeons and Dragons game every week. So we talk a lot. And I was talking to him recently, right before Emerald City Comic Con, actually. He signed a bunch of books and drew some things in it so that I could sell them at the convention.
Mhm,
And when we were, I was telling him about, oh, how I'm working on my pages, how I'm doing different panels for each page, and and like how laying out these pages is taking so long, doing these storyboards is taking so long. And he's like, and I said to him, yeah, I'm like, if I'm just drawing something, like if I'm like drawing I have a picture of you, and I'm like doing a drawing of it, I
yeah.
can listen to music or even a podcast in the background, but when I'm laying out a page, I can't. In the same
Yeah.
way I can't when I'm writing.
Mhm,
He said, yeah, I'm the same way. He's like, that's the part of the story that takes the most energy, is the layouts or the storyboards, is like, and he's also a professional. Chris is like a professional storyboard artist for like, he'd worked for the TV show Penguin, for, on HBO. Like, um, he's just like, yeah, like that's the most work, is really the part where you're figuring out what every shot looks like, and then how all those shots need to fit together for a page, and then how all those pages need to fit together.
mhm,
And it's something that I never thought of that. I always thought, oh, like the longest part is the hardest part, has to be like getting all the little details in. And I'm not saying that that part is necessarily easy, but I guess it doesn't require the same amount of like mental thinking. Like it might be more work in terms of like moving your hand because you're getting every little line in, but it just like, you kind of already know what the picture is going to look like. So you don't have to think about like, okay, what is this look like? Imagine in your head, like, what is this character? in this room look like from this angle? Okay, what would it look like from a different angle? Now, what if they're in a car? Like, oh, okay, what if they're smiling? What if they're not? Like, there's so many things. What's their body language like? So much thought that has to go into every image in a comic.
I do this thing where I make the character's hair hot pink and everything else is like, I don't know, like dimmer or like not as saturated, so she stands out in every single scene.
No, that's great. And it's like, the comic that I'm drawing is like, it's definitely going to be black and white because I'm not even,
Yeah.
I have to feel like before I even want to touch color, I feel like there's so much I have to learn. And, there's ways of doing that with like, but I think it is really important to like, color is such a great tool to do that one, and it's something I've noticed color stuff a lot, even like because, I'll see the art before the colors and then I'll see the colorist come in. And so
Mhm.
that's something I'll notice a lot. Like a good colorist, like will know who the most important character in the scene is.
Yeah.
And also, will like not just think about, well, what does this scene look like naturally, but like pick colors that match the mood of the scene.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And sometimes that'll be something I'll write in. I'll be like, well, it's nighttime or like things like that. But just like other than that, like that's mostly them that they're coming up with. And, but I always think like, it's just like having characters. That's the one of the hardest thing in comics is having characters that like look the same, like are distinct. So they look different from other characters, right? So you can tell like this is the main character versus this is one of the supporting characters, right? So like, but then at the same time, having that character maybe have different expressions, but still look the same in every panel. So it looks like the same artist is drawing it so that we know. And it's a really tricky thing to do,
Mhm.
and like, I think good artists, color is one way to, color is a way to do it. Giving characters different body shapes, like so that their
Yeah, yeah.
silhouette looks different, especially because it's like it's one thing to like know what a character looks like when it's a close up and you can see every like line on their face. It's another when they're really far away, and so you want to make sure like, oh, you can tell what their body looks like from far away. Like I think one of the best examples of that is like the Fantastic Four, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
like the thing is a big rocky guy, so even from far away you can tell his shape. Mr. Fantastic stretches, and so like you can tell who he is. The Invisible Woman, well, she's the only woman, so that helps, but also like, it's always like a dotted line. And the Human Torch has got flames, and it's just like it's really seems really simple, but it's like it's a genius thing because like you can have them on a panel on a really small on a panel with a million other things happening, and you always be able to pick out who is who and what they're doing.
Mhm.
Um, but you're doing that in your own way, right? By like having that color stand out and knowing, because it's easy to take for granted that a reader is going to know where their eye should go in a panel or where their eye should go on a page, or or watching a movie like where your eye should go on the screen. But like we don't automatically know that, like, and like there are you don't realize, or it's taken me a while to realize how much thought artists and directors and cinematographers and colorists like all put into like making sure that the reader's eye is in the right place.
Hmm. Yeah. That's why I also do like a faint like airbrushing of a slightly like shady color. And you can't really tell, but when you take it off, you realize your eyes don't know where to go anymore. But when you put it back on, you know exactly where to go.
Well, that's the thing, like it can often art can appear really flat when it's black and white,
Yeah.
unless you have to use really strong blacks and grays, and because otherwise everything might look it's in this like it's on the same plane, like it's like a two-dimensional image, and it's like, okay, that's one of the things color can help do is create depth, and dark and light can help do that too, right? Like so
Mhm.
like, okay, what's happening in the foreground, what's in the background, like where is like where is not just like left, right, and up and down, but like where like in perspective is the character and where should your eye go? It's really tricky. But
You can do like cross-hatching too.
yes, I've experimented with cross hatching. I like it for I've had some fun with it for certain things, like
Mm.
certain like drawings I've done. I'm proud of it. I don't think I'm going to be using too much of it in my comic. I'm not really sure. There's still a lot I need to figure out. Like I'm still learning how to spot blacks. And like, I just wrote a scene that took place at night, like in a dark room where a character is only being lit by a TV. And that was a really fun one to do because I was
That
like,
sounds cool.
it's going to definitely look really different than the other scenes that are taking place outside in like sunny Florida. Like,
Mhm.
so, I don't know. It's exciting. It's exciting and it's fun to
No, it
do that.
does sound fun. Well, I have one last question, Mark.
Sure.
What's one advice you give to the aspiring storytellers watching this right now?
Oh wow. I think the thing I would say to do, and this may sound like really easy advice, but like is just to really just make your thing,
Mm,
right? And keep making things. And like I say make your thing because it's like, if you're writing, some things are easier to make than others. Like it's easy for me to go say shoot a movie, like okay, but you've got to have a script and you've got to have actors and stuff like that. But even then, like things are easier to make than ever, I think. Like at the very least, you can write a script,
yeah.
and maybe it won't be any good, but your next one is going to be better just by finishing it,
Mhm.
right? But like, you know, just just the act of like, if you're a writer, just like keep writing, like write something, finish it, then move on, and then show some people you trust, get their opinion on it, and then write the next thing, and keep doing that. You're going to get better. Like you might not even notice it, but it will get better. And like listen to people's feedback, and it doesn't mean you have to take every note from them, but like if you show it to three people and they're all giving you the same note, it's probably a note that's worth following. And that, and just also like I think finding friends and peers that are like into the same thing that you're doing, um and starting those friendships, that's also really important. Like,
That's
and you
why
can
I
call it,
speak to you.
I'm sorry.
That's why I talked to you at the Comic
Yeah,
Con.
and you can call it networking, but you can also just call it, because it's like you never know. First of all, like at the very least, you find somebody to talk to stuff about, because not everybody has the same skills and interests, so it's a good thing to be able to do that. But
Yeah.
besides that, it's also like, but yeah, then you might find somebody that can help you on a project at some point. Maybe that's just giving you notes, maybe they're going to be the sound person in your movie, or
Yeah.
or they're going to do lighting, and volunteer to see if they can use your help, because like people will remember that, and
Mhm.
also you get experience doing that, right? Like, so I did so many internships, or I'd be on the set of a movie, of like, or like of a music video, and just like holding a boom mic or whatever, like, and especially in student stuff, and it's like it may seem like a boring thing, and often it is, or maybe you're just even just getting coffee for people, but just being around that, you pick things up, you learn
Yeah.
things, you see like, okay, if you're on a good set, like, oh, this is how you're like, this is how a set is run well by a director, or oh, look, this set isn't run well, like the director doesn't know what they want, and so then everything's kind of not working. You learn things by that, and then like usually people are nice about asking questions. For comics, it's not at like a film set, like people are working separately, but like it's still good to like, if you can go to a comic convention, and like go around, like do what you did, go to talk to artists, and like, because the worst that can happen is somebody doesn't have the time to talk, or they don't want to talk, and just the good thing is there's so many people in Artist Alley, there's somebody else to talk to. And the
Yeah.
truth is, though, most of us are happy to talk. Like, yes, we want to sell things, but it's like we're sitting there for 4 days. Like, if all we did was just like sit there and nobody talked to us, it gets really, it gets boring. And it's interesting to talk to people, and it doesn't, like, I don't feel that my time is wasted if I have an interesting conversation with somebody and it
Mhm.
doesn't lead to them buying me a comic, or saying like, hey, I want to work with you on something. Like maybe one out of every 10 or one out of every 20 conversations, leads, whatever it is, leads to that. But like, I still enjoy it. Like, and, you know, and then you go back to that same convention the next year, you might see those people, or you find them online and you continue a conversation with them, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like we're doing now. And it's like, you never know, like maybe one day you'll direct something that I wrote, or, or like you'll draw, who knows? Like, but it's, it's like so many of the people that I've wound up working with are people that I've either met online or I met in conventions. Yeah, some are people that like, okay, a publisher like introduced, said you're going to work with this artist, and that's how I. But most of them are just people that I met, and whether it's at the convention or they're at a party after the convention, or not even a party, like at the bar, like nothing, not even at like some closed exclusive party. It's just people, even at this last convention, I met people that maybe I'll work with, like that were just, and I like seeing, new art, and people will, if people give, sometimes people come over and show me their art, and, or, you know, and I found artists that way. Like, you never know. And it doesn't always work out like that, but like, I know that if I have a chance to help that person, I usually will. Like, even if it's just like, oh, retweeting their art or like following them on Instagram, like I want to like help other artists like get seen, and hopefully they'll do that for me. And so, but yeah, like to go back to your question, I think is to keep writing and to keep it up, because I think the people that I know are most successful are probably the ones that are most persistent, that keep doing it, that face a lot of rejection. Because I've had many more things rejected than have actually happened, but ultimately that still adds up to a lot of comics that I've had out there. And
Mm,
that, and just like, talk to other people who are doing the thing that you love, and just, like I said, just talk to them. You don't even think about asking them for something
yeah.
until you really get to know them, but just talk to them, and you'll learn from them, you'll develop relationships, you'll have interesting things. It'll also, like, you'll start to feel more comfortable. And yeah, I think so. Those are my two pieces of advice.
That was really good advice, though. Thank you for saying that.
Okay.
And where can our awesome listeners find your work?
So you can the best place to go is marksable.com, marksable.com. It's my website. um but you can also find me on at Mark Sable on Twitter, at Mark Sable on Instagram is usually that's probably the social media. I'm also on Blue Sky and all this other stuff, but like usually Instagram is a good place. If you can, people can DM me there. You can message me on Twitter too. I'm just not on there as much, or X or whatever it is now. Um,
Mm,
and then yeah, I mean, my stuff is available. Most of my stuff is available on Amazon. Um, if you just put my name into the Amazon bar, it's there. But also, I have a book called Chaotic Neutral. That's the one thing that's not available on Amazon. That's the Dungeons and Dragons book.
mm.
Um, that's a book, but we did a Kickstarter for it. But now through BackerKit, we're still selling the copies that we have left. So if you just if you just Google Mark Sable and Chaotic Neutral, you should be able to find it, or message me, and I'll be happy to to help you find it.
Or you can like click right here in the description or whatever.
Oh,
Pretty sure I will be putting it in there. Unless I
okay.
forget, but I don't think I would.
I'll remind you if you forget, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. That was 2 hours long. I didn't even realize until I looked at
Oh,
the
wow.
clock. I know, right? Time flies. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us and sharing your incredible insights.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk to you, and
That
hopefully
was
I'll see
so
you again
fun.
at a con.
Maybe we should like set up another meeting after this one.
Okay.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.